I'm interested in all of history. It's all endlessly fascinating. I'm interested in the people of history. There's so many wonderful stories among wars and battles and seductions and betrayals and the choices that people make. So many things that you would be hard-pressed to make up. And then, of course, I don't make it up, but I take it and I file off the serial numbers, and I turn it up to 11, and I change the color from red to purple, and I have a great incident for the books.
The world of Westeros, as I see it, and I think as George Martin wrote it, is a homage to England in the Wars of the Roses. So we're really looking at the period between about 1450 and 1485. But within that homage to the Wars of the Roses, you have a huge amount of other influences and ideas and characters that have been poured in from other parts of English history, of French history, of world history, stretching, as I see it, right back to the ancient world.
The War of the Roses was one of the original inspirations. The War of Roses was fought between the Yorks and the Lancasters, and I have the Starks and the Lannisters. The War of Roses was a contest for the English throne that lasted over several generations. There were some amazing, colorful personalities on both sides. There were constant reversals. It was not an easy war. One side won and the other side won and the first side came back. But mixed into that was family loyalties and love and sex and all this incredible stuff.
You look back at the real history of the Wars of the Roses, the English king had taken the French crown, and the pressure of trying to hold on to the French crown eventually began to tell on English politics. And so from the 1450s through to the 1480s, there was a total breakdown in order in England, an eruption of wars between two dynasties, Lancaster and York, but within that, lots more factions, lots more kind of personal feuding, and really, when you step back and look at it, a period of total chaos that was ended when the Tudor dynasty took over in 1485. However, it doesn't map exactly, and I think that's what's brilliant about Game of Thrones and Westeros, is that when you try and make the comparisons, they never quite hold and they just sort of escape from your fingers. So that, as a historian, that's why I love watching it. So this is an alternative history of the Wars of the Roses, all the other best bits of history kind of chucked in and given a stir.
Glad to see you're protecting the throne.
Steady, old thing. How many King's Arthurs have polished it, I wonder?
The Iron Throne, or really the concept of the Iron Throne in the world of Westeros, represents ultimate power. And that's pretty much how it was in medieval England as well. We're talking about actually a marble chair. Whoever was sitting on that marble chair and wearing the crown of England wielded ultimate power in the country.
I command the council to make all necessary arrangements for my coronation. I wish to be crowned within the fortnight.
What you had during the Wars of the Roses was an enormous series of factional battles between different families, all trying to take that crown, take that throne, and take power for themselves.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground.
I'm not sure exactly where George got the concept of what has been called the least comfortable chair in the entire kingdom. But a single power was really the definition of all medieval rulership. One person ruled. So when we get a transformation in power, when this happens anywhere in Europe, but especially in England, there's going to be everybody fighting for one side or another. No!
I did warn you not to trust me.
There will be sides taken, there will be blows, and there will be rebellions.
Poor Ned Stark. Brave man, terrible judgment.
What George has done here is write a fantastical tribute to the Wars of the Roses, but cut loose from the history. So he's playing with characters we half recognize, we three-quarters recognize in some cases, but then he's setting them off on paths of their own.
The future of our family will be determined in these next few months. We could establish a dynasty that will last 1,000 years. Or we could collapse into nothing, as the Targaryens did.
I wouldn't want to come face to face with Tywin Lannister. He's terrifying. And he wouldn't want to come face to face with Edward I either, because this was a king who was so scary in person, he was rumoured once to have scared one of his servants to death.
Sit. Eat.
Edward I, for all intents and purposes, was Tywin. Or Tywin is, for all intents and purposes, Edward I.
Like Tywin Lannister, he was not above doing devious, the ends justify the means kind of things.
Edward I is a king who does not think much of burning an entire town if he feels that they're rebellious against it.
Certainly the policies that Edward followed, Tywin would have approved of. I mean, this was a man who was known as Hammer of the Scots, the man who conquered Wales and brought it into his kingdom.
They're both relentless in their pursuit of power, of authority, absolutely determined, but in a sense really frustrated by their own family and specifically by their children.
I don't distrust you because you're a woman. I distrust you because you're not as smart as you think you are.
And that draws on real history, because Edward I was incredibly frustrated with his son, Edward II, who was never the kind of the military leader that Edward I would be, was not a serious politician. And so that frustration with his children really maps from history of medieval England through to the world of Westeros.
For 40 years I've tried to teach you. If you haven't learned by now, you never will.
As far as we know, Edward I did not actually get crossbowed while sitting on the loo, but met his death probably in bed.
You're no son of mine. I am your son. I have always been your son.
I think the comparison between Tyrion Lannister and Richard III is a very good one. 16th century historians describe Richard III, as this hunchbacked, evil-looking character whose physical unpleasantness directly reflected his lack of moral character.
Richard III has been vilified through history, especially in Shakespeare, as being monstrously deformed, and you could characterize Richard III as, quote-unquote, a cripple.
That's how a lot of people see Tyrion Lannister in the world of Westeros. But of course, as the viewer, we know that's not the whole story.
He's Tyrion the Imp of House Lannister. He killed your father. He murdered the Hand of the King.
Oh, did I kill him too?
I love Richard III. He's one of my favorite historical characters. He wasn't a hunchback. He didn't have a twisted arm, but because he was the king who was deposed by Henry VII. So the Tudor historians tried to make him a physically twisted, deceitful, kin-slaying, child-slaying monster. And a lot of what happened to Richard III is happening to Tyrion.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
Tyrion's someone who's easily cast as a villain. The dwarf, hated by the gods, so they twist his body into unfortunate shapes. This is a clear sign of the evil inside him. This was how the medieval mindset worked.
I did not kill Joffrey, but I wish that I had.
I think a really good historical comparison for Cersei is Margaret of Anjou, known as the she-wolf of France, one of the strongest females in the real-life Wars of the Roses.
Margaret of Anjou, the strong queen of England in the 1450s, wants to exert power like a man.
I should have been born a man. I'd rather face 1,000 swords than be shut up inside with this flock of frightened hens.
She's willing to go to any lengths, politically or otherwise, to rule the country and protect her children's rights.
You love your children. It's your one redeeming quality, that and your cheekbones.
Joffrey is king.
Joffrey is king.
You are here to advise him.
Only here to advise him.
But you could also look at a load of the other women of the Wars of the Roses, really strong women whose route to power and whose driving motivation is either gaining or preserving power for their sons.
You're the Hand of the King.
No, Uncle. Clearly it would not be appropriate for a woman to assume that role. I'm merely advising my son until he comes of age and chooses a hand for himself.
There are so many women who are leading their sons because their husbands are either captured or fleeing, or in fact are just incompetent.
A good king knows when to save his strength and when to destroy his enemies.
So in steps a very strong woman.
Everyone who isn't us is an enemy.
I think that's at the heart of Cersei. I think that really does draw on what we know of real history from the 15th century.
There are those that say your children were not fathered by King Robert, that they are bastards born of incest and adultery.
A lie. A lie from the lips of Stannis Baratheon. I deny it.
Good.
Am I free to go?
After your atonement.
So Cersei's walk of shame, designed to humiliate her, I mean, it has real historical precedent for it. If we look at Jane Shaw, during the reign of Richard III, she was, in a way, scapegoated for a lot of the political problems that had gone before, and she was made to walk through the streets of London dressed in a kirtle, which is more or less her underclothes, and holding a taper in front of her.
In an age when women were modestly dressed and they wore veils, it was actually quite shocking to see someone dressed like that, and it would have been quite humiliating. Cersei is naked when she performs her walk of shame. To us as viewers, it has almost the same impact as seeing Jane Shaw in her kirtle would have had. It's almost an emotional translation of what it would have felt like.
Really serious public shaming and public penance. There's a huge amount of ritual purpose in that, which is to strip her of any majesty or magnificence that she might have accrued in her career before that point. I see a huge amount of Joffrey Baratheon in Richard II. Both of them boy kings, both of them not really learned in the ways of being a king, absolutely drunk on their own majesty.
Write back to Lord Frey and command him to send Robb Stark's head. I'm going to serve it to Sansa at my wedding feast.
A joke? Joffrey did not mean it.
Yes, I did.
Richard II became king because his father died before his grandfather died.
I should have spent more time with you. Shown you how to be a man.
He's not been around his father. He's never been in military situations.
They're coming ashore.
Archers!
There are too many.
He's a brat.
Kneel before your king. I said, kneel!
Richard II was a really spiteful, vengeful king, and you see that just bubbling up in Joffrey.
If it please your grace, Lady Sansa is
No.
very tired.
No, you'll wait here.
The Purple Wedding, this dramatic death of Joffrey, which we're all sort of cheering when it happens on the screen. Historically, I think you can look at some comparisons quite early in the English Middle Ages when Eustace of Boulogne, who was the heir to the throne under King Stephen, died quite suddenly.
One day at a feast, Eustace was eating lamprey pie and he choked to death.
He's choking!
Help the poor boy!
Some people said it was poison. Other people said Eustace died of apoplexy because he was so furious with his father for signing away the throne to somebody else.
There are these incidents in history where people do die mysteriously, but Eustace is the only one I know who actually died choking at a feast, so that was probably the inspiration for the mode of Joffrey's death.
I've always hated the bells. They ring for horror. A dead king, a city under siege.
You look well suited for battle, my lord.
Well, I'm not.
I think one area where Game of Thrones has really mashed up history is through its invention and its use of different types of weapons, different types of armor.
You'll kiss it again when I return, and taste my uncle's blood.
The Lannister armor harked back to samurai armor, which I found fascinating, because the ability to take, Japanese feudal armor and splice it onto a story that's loosely in the English Middle Ages makes it really exotic, really exciting. I don't know that you could call it historically accurate, but I don't think that's the point.
Well, the show's gotten a lot of arms and armor right. I don't know who's doing the arms and armor consulting, but it's really quite brilliant. I love the swords and the fact that there are some that are a little more powerful than the others. Brienne is able to break another sword with hers because it's specially made, and higher quality steel swords would have done that.
The idea of a sword that had a name, that symbolized power, Very important part of medieval culture.
They say the best swords have names. Any ideas?
Oathkeeper.
Swords were universally accepted as not just great weapons, but as inheritable items, almost like relics.
My father's sword, his father before him, the Mormonts have carried it for 5 centuries.
I think that these aspects of the arms and armor and of the fighting, all of that is really quite dead on.
In the name of Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of his name.
Don't look away.
King of the Andals and the first
Father
man.
will know if you do.
I, Eddard, of the House Stark, sentence you to die.
Beheading for aristocrats started really as a decent way to get rid of an aristocrat. You'd rather be beheaded, goes the theory, than be hanged.
Kneel, my lord.
And so it became, in the real Wars of the Roses, sort of the go-to method of dispatching your enemies.
Beheadings for noble people were very common. The biggest crime is treason. So what Ned Stark does, for example, that's going to bring punishment that is fatal.
So long as I am your king, treason shall never go unpunished. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head.
Ned Stark's a very interesting character. I mean, obviously, the patriarch of the House of Stark, which, if we're looking for Wars of the Roses parallels, is like the House of York. But if you look at Richard, Duke of York, the real historical patriarch, his career really doesn't map onto Ned's journey very well. And actually, there's another character who I think is much more comparable with Ned Stark, and that's William Lord Hastings. Now, Hastings was the great pal of Edward IV, who I think unquestionably is Robert Baratheon. And they had this very close, chummy personal relationship. And we can all remember, you know, the early episodes of season 1 where we see Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark enjoying that kind of fraternal relationship. Well, that's Hastings and Edward IV all over. And what's really interesting is Hastings helped Richard III to take the throne when Edward IV dies. But afterwards, Richard turned on him and he was summarily beheaded. And I think there's a lot of the career of Hastings that you can follow through the story of Ned Stark. You know, this loyal friend of the king who outlives the king, tries to do the right thing, and what's his reward? Head rolling in the dirt.